So tonight we're covering the third book of the Space Trilogy, and this book is actually as big as the other two combined. So I have 40 overheads, and I'm still not doing it justice, I think, but it's a really good book. But I had a few loose ends from last week, and one was some scriptures. I keep bumping into these scriptures that are supportive of the themes in the Space Trilogy. And here's one from Matthew, and it said, "And they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of the heavens to the other." So that means there's things out in the heavens, maybe, or it could be. Maybe someday will. Anyhow, that scripture is kind of interesting to me, and I guess it appears in Mark also. Another one from Ephesians. The important part of that is in verse 10 here. So the manifold wisdom of God might now be made known to the rulers and authorities in the heavenly places. Like there's more than one of them places. So there are some scriptures that I think may have inspired C.S. Lewis. Here's another one that relates to, in effect, what happened to Ransom during this sequence of three books. It says, "For those God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son. And and those he predestined, he also called, and those he called, he justified, and so on, and glorified." So Ransom was definitely called to Venus. He wasn't even a believer at the time, but he was called to Venus, and out of curiosity or something, he responded. And you'll remember from the fight he had with the demon-possessed Weston that he crushed the head of that demon, and he suffered a bite on the heel, which is very biblical and all that. So, and here's one. I'm not sure I shared this one. A quote from Screwtape Letter number 8. One must face the fact that all the talk about his love being God's love for men is not propaganda. It's an appalling truth. He really does want to fill the universe with a lot of loathsome little replicas of himself, creatures whose life will be qualitative like his own. And in a sense, some of what happened to Ransom was, qualitatively like it happened to Jesus. And so there are things in other quotes from other parts of C.S. Lewis's books that make me think that all these things that he's showing are biblically inspired, or at least not inconsistent with his understanding of the Bible. All right, so that's some of the loose ends perhaps from last time. Okay, so we're going to look at that hideous strength, and some of the storyline I think Dr. Whalen talked about in those, and that here's from the Amazon write-up. It describes, okay, so there were dark forces that are in the first two books, and those dark forces are poised to subjugate Earth. So that's the story here. Word is out that the wizard Merlin has come back, or may come back to life, and may have the key to ultimate power, for whichever side can find him and win him to their side. And there's a sinister technocratic organization that Professor Wedlin described, gaining power, and their plan is to remake society, actually remake the whole Earth in a way. And it's up to Ransom and some of his friends to somehow stop this, and applying age-old wisdom. So it's a really a big battle between good and evil, and lots of excitement if you get into it. And a little later I'll talk about, and maybe real soon, I can't remember now. There are themes in here that seem very much like Star Wars. And I'll point those out a little bit later. All right, so here's my 2 cents on it. The trilogy covers, in a sense, everything from Book of Revelation at the end, and from the Book of Genesis all the way to the Book of Revelation. And the first 2 books deal with those endpoints somewhat. That hideous strength is about the middle part, in between the bookends, so to speak. It's about the battle between good and evil on Earth here. And the preface of it, Professor Whalen pointed out, you might remember, is points out that the main points are also in his apologetic book, The Abolition of Man. And I'll point out a couple of the similarities with that. So, but what the hideous strength is, really, it's a number of storylines together, interwoven, and there's a realistic domestic novel about a young couple. But it's also a big battle between good and evil, and so it's very dystopic. In other words, it's kind of describing a downhill path, and definitely C.S. Lewis was worried about the downhill path of Western civilization. That was a major part of his concern. There's a little bit about transhumanism in this too, so it shows he's a bit of a prophet in a way, talking about transhumanism in 1940, 41. Okay, here's the Star Wars part. So Merlin is the last practitioner of ancient arts, just like Darth Vader. I remember in the first one, when he's on the Death Star with the general in charge of the Death Star, that general says to him, "You're the last of a dying breed, and you're practicer of these ancient arts and all that." The Jedi Knights were almost extinct, and the Jedi could move objects, physical objects, with their mind, and they could influence other people's minds. You may recall in one of the scenes, Obi-Wan gets past some guards by putting thoughts in their minds, and when Luke approaches, what was that big reptilian, Jabba the Hutt, Jabba says, "Don't try your Jedi mind tricks on me," and that kind of thing. So, well, Merlin can influence minds, plays a big role in this. And he doesn't so much move inanimate objects, but he utilizes living objects. He can make the grass be an ally to his cause, and plants, and certainly animals, and that plays a big role. So there's some parallels with Star Wars in this book that are very interesting. So basically, the organization NICE, that's the bad side, that they're trying to lure. Oh, by the way, both sides want Merlin on their side, just like they in Star Wars, they're trying to get Luke to embrace the dark side, and so he's pulled between the dark side and the I guess the light side, if you will. So there are lots of parallels you can think of, and it helps make the book interesting. The NICE is a little bit like the Emperor or the Empire, like the Death Star is a big machine, and they have a lot of robots, it's very mechanistic organization, so to speak. But the good guys are more loose knit. They're more like the Jedi. They're more organic in their relationships. So there's even some parallels with Star Wars in that regard. It's, I think, very, very interesting. By the way, on transhumanism, those of you that aren't affiliated with Reason to Believe has a book on transhumanism, came out last year or the year before. But they're talking about some of the technologies can actually enhance human beings and possibly alter human nature, and um, that's what NICE is planning to do. I'll read you the quotes that basically parallel what is described in this book as going on right now in society. So that's in a book written in 1940 or 41 or so. Or should we take control of our own evolution? That is exactly what NICE is planning to do. Take control of human evolution. So in a sense, there's some prophecy there. Okay, you may recall this. I'm not sure where I showed it. It might have been in the fake news thing, but I showed that before. But these are the current major worldviews, and I just wanted to point out that the NICE organization, and certainly some of those people, are what on this chart are the postmodern. I'll read a couple quotes that describe very much the postmodern, which is something that C.S. Lewis was worried about, those people. And the good guys are kind of a mixture of these, in a sense. So it's the right hand against the left hand of this chart, in a way. But more than the current, you'll notice that's the current worldviews. But in this, C.S. Lewis brings in an ancient worldview and enlists their aid, because basically the medieval worldview. And there's a lot in this book about how some of the medieval wisdom and attitudes and things in the mental model of the universe that the medievals had that are helpful to the good guy side. So this was his last book, The Discarded Image. And I'm only about 1/4 through with that, but the point is he brings that into account. And also, here's a book by Michael Ward that he says, I understand the structure, the deep structure of the 7 Narnia books, and it's really about 7 heavens. It's about the planets, Jupiter, Mars, so that's the sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, and Saturn. And each book has as its theme some of the spiritual aspects attributed and relating to the various planets in the medieval model. So this is incorporated in the book to some degree. So it's really an interesting work in a way. All right, so we'll talk about the storyline now. All right. By the way, the depictions of the society are just like today. There's fake news, propaganda going on, brainwashing and brainwashed people. I said transhumanism and quasi-governmental organizations cleverly hiding their real nature and purposes, but doing a lot of damage. So there's lots of themes in this book that are absolutely current, even though it was written around the year I was born, a long time ago. All right. So the domestic story. There's the two people, the domestic protagonists. It's a rather average kind of petty bourgeois married couple, and they've been married only 6 months. And the woman, Jane, is kind of at the point where we meet her, kind of disillusioned. She's childish, stay at home, but her career has been kind of thwarted. She got stalled working on a doctoral thesis about a poet, John Donne, and she's just kind of bouncing around and very, as I say, disillusioned in this and that. And can't seem to get back to her thesis, can't seem to dig her heels into anything. She's just feeling kind of worthless and so on. But she has strange, very strange nightmares and visions. And these are starting to really bother her. All right. And She sees things that later turn out to be about Merlin, who is believed to be in a trance yet, or buried in the woods near a college in a small town near where she lives. And Nice wants to buy that woods because they want to dig up Merlin and get him on their side. So, and some of her dreams are about what Nice is doing, the bad things that Nice is involved in, and she's seeing things that are frightening. And some of it ends up getting her introduced to the good guys in this story in a kind of a strange way, seemingly by accident, but there are no accidents, I guess. The husband, his name is Mark. He's kind of ambitious, kind of a low-level sociology fellow at Bracton College, an ancient college in a small town, very small. It has only 40 fellows in it, and he is totally absorbed in his career. And all of a sudden, they used to talk, but then now they don't talk so much because he's wrapped up in trying to get ahead and trying to become an insider in the college politics. And it's very interesting interplay with him and the college faculty and this and that. But his unique feature is he is a very gifted writer, and Nice is after him. They want him on the team. All right, so that's part of the storyline. Okay, so Nice. Here's Nice. You may remember from Professor Wayland, the National Institute of Coordinated Experiments. It's an non-governmental organization, but they have ties and quasi-governmental powers are being given to them because of the wonderful things they promise. You'll see a list of some of the things they have and so on. But to me, the interesting part about this was in a sense, foretelling that quasi non-governmental organizations can do a lot of harm in a society like England or like America, and they are in America. And I'll have an example of that at the very end. All right, of that. So this is, to me, is current kinds of things. Lots of bad things are going on, both in America and Europe, by these non-governmental but powerful organizations. Okay, so the other organizational protagonist is something loosely called the Society of St. Anne's, and it's located a short drive from Bracton College. They're all everything's around this small town and this college, and the leader is Dr. Ransom, the fellow that came back from Venus with an unhealed heel, and he's their, in a sense, spiritual leader. And I looked up St. Anne, thinking that C.S. Lewis uses symbols for everything. So St. Anne is the mother of Mary, grandmother of Jesus, patron saint of a whole string of things: unmarried women, housewives, women in labor, grandmothers, childless couples, and more. So there's definitely a feminine aspect to what she's a patron saint of, and I think that's not an accident, not at all. Part of the symbolism in this book. All right, so okay. I want to talk a little bit more about these organizations, and now this I'm swinging into some material that, in a sense, related to Abolition of Man, which is a very short book, but many people think it's his most difficult apologetic book. But one of the features of that book is he describes men without chests, and I'll describe that in a minute what that means. And that is exactly what Nice produces. It's an organization. It's run by basically hidden controllers. you know, you never know who really is running the organization. It's and once you're into it, resignation is a death warrant, and that happens to somebody in there that's decided, yeah, this is not for me, and tries to quit, and he's killed before he gets home. So it's run by kind of a forced consensus um, that's constructed and enforced by political correct language, and I've seen that kind of thing in action, actually, where in an organization, if there's some politically correct this design has to work, and this is what we're going to work on. Anybody that says anything negative about the design is shunned, and you can actually force a consensus through control of the language and social pressure and things like that. But one of the goals is complete destruction of individualism and eventually world domination, actually interplanetary domination. Domination. Weston was part of NICE, and I'll have a quote that describes that later. But here's the theory from Abolition of Man. He says humans can be thought of in a three-part model. This is the left and right brain all lumped together as both the rational and the imaginative side of a human being, and then their heart. Is the Christian terminology, the seat of character, the unconscious mind. That's the middle. That's the chest part, and then the belly or animal appetites and drives and things. And he says that in effect, postmodernism and modern philosophies will shrink this, atrophy this, so the person is either rationally driven or animal, driven by animal appetites, that there's no character in the middle to help decide things. All right. But here's some of the bad things that NICE does, even though everything sounds so wonderful. They gather up and use animals and people in inhumane experiments. They do a lot of vivisection. That's basically surgery with no anesthetic. They do a lot of that, and they appropriate land without regard for the owners. It's like Agenda 21 in Northern California, where radical environmentalists appropriate land and destroy logging businesses and do things, destroy farms and things by just edict kind of things. All right. And they are starting to practice transhumanism and various things, and their goal is to basically reshape humanity and improve us. All right. And they manipulate the general public with wonderful propaganda. I'll read a little bit of it for you. And I remember in the fake news, I've talked to you people about the more, roughly 100-year history. But one of the quotes I didn't in fake news read to you from Edward Bernays is, the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. And basically, that's what NICE was doing. And they describe how they do it, and it's very, very interesting application of that idea that we saw in the fake news description. Okay, so Mark is kind of drawn to NICE because he's kind of recruited because he sees it as a chance to be an inner ring. He wants to belong to something. And at first he was trying to belong and be the inner ring at the college, but then he sees a chance to be the inner ring in the country. So that's very attractive to him. Okay, and what he doesn't realize that he would be surrendering his individuality to the collective to do so, to be part of the inner ring. All right. So basically, he's going to use his journalistic skills and create propaganda to further Nice, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Um, but this is basically, the collective idea, socialism, communist model, where everybody is insignificant. Now, I think I can read a few quotes. Let's see, page 39, that will give you a little flavor of the book. Um, all right, so he's being recruited. By the way, he's being recruited by Lord Feverstone, who was really divine in the first two books. Divine somehow, well, probably because he took a lot of gold back to England, bought his way into nobility. And he's now in the House of Commons or House of Lords, one of them, and he's very powerful, and he's recruiting Mark into trying to recruit into the organization. And here's part of the excerpts from a little speech he's giving Mark to lure him into the organization. He says, humanity is at the crossroads. It's time to take control of our own destiny. If science is really given a free hand, it can now take over the human race and recondition it and make man a really efficient animal. And he says, and we have a three-pronged program. Right? There are three main problems that we're going to work on. The first is the interplanetary problem, and he says that's been temporarily thwarted because our man Weston was murdered. And Mark said, "Oh, who murdered him? What happened? I heard it was he was killed in a blitz." And he's no, he was murdered, and we think we know who did it. The murderer is a respectable Cambridge Don with weak eyes, a game leg, and a fair beard. He's actually died at this college. They're sitting at Bracton where he's getting recruited. All right. And Weston was murdered because he's on the side of Nice, basically. And he says, and that Cambridge Dawn is part of the enemy, and they know now that we have at last got some real power. And the question is, how humanity is going to go will be decided in the next 60 years. And they want to try to stop us, but we're not going to let that. You have to be on the right side. You can't be neutral in this. You have to be on the right side. So he's recruiting. He says, but the first problem was interplanetary. That's temporarily on hold. He says, but the second problem is our rivals on this plant. And he says, and I don't mean only insects and bacteria. There is far too much life of every kind about animal and vegetable and too many humans too. He says, we have to clean the place up. That's one of our big problems. He says, and our third problem is man himself. We've got to take charge of man. And he says, let's see, and you and I want to be the people who do the taking charge. We don't want to be the ones that are taken charge of. So he says, oh, we'll do some simple things at first, sterilization of the unfit, liquidation of backward races, selective breeding, but then the real education begins. He says, it'll be mainly psychology at first, he says, but we'll move on to biochemical conditioning, and in the end, direct manipulation of the brain. And they have things cooking on some of these things. And he says, what we really need is a trained sociologist that has a radically realistic outlook. And that's means Mark, okay? And he says, oh, you want me to write it down? He says, no, I want you to camouflage it. We can't let anybody know. Anyhow, so it talks about his camouflage. Anyhow, so that gives you an idea of what they're really after. Their agenda is, take over the world, do all that. All right, so there's another part on page 85. And this describes Mark why he was a candidate. And he's describing himself. He's trying to do some self-analysis as he kind of gets into this and understanding what the psychological pressures are. He's trying to understand it. He and he's talking about his education. For his education had the curious effect of making things that he read and wrote more real to him than things he saw. He had a great reluctance ever to use such words as man or woman. He preferred to write about vocational groups, elements, classes, populations. He believed as firmly as any mystic in the superior reality of things that are not seen, things that are imagined. He was postmodern. The reason he was perfect for nice is he was a postmodern. Okay. Let's see, what else did I want to say? Okay, I wanted to read a little bit about the propaganda, man, because it shows you the power of propaganda. I'll just skim through. Basically, Nice was going to destroy two small towns, and one they had to divert a river because they want to build this great big building on what is damp ground, and so they had to dry the ground out. And so to do that, they're going to remake the earth. They're going to move this river, rechannel this river, and destroy a little village and a lot of things in order to achieve the purpose they want. And without regard to any of the history, it's very heartless in a way. But the locals resist. They don't go for that because it's changing everything. And so Nice wants to start basically riots. They want to start riots so they can get more police power. Because right now they have police power, certain amount, but they want basically martial law power over that area. And so they're going to gin up and make sure there's a riot planned. They have the whole thing timed and planned and everything, and marks to write up the description the night before so that as soon as it happens, they can hit the newspapers with the right story about them. So there's two newspapers that they write to. Okay, one version is for the most respectable of our papers, and the other is for a more popular organ. All right, so there's two. One is for the elites, and one is for the commoners, so to speak. And so I'll read a little bit of each of them just to give you an idea of the skillfulness of propagandists as described here. All right. While it would be premature to make any final comment on last night's riot at Edgestowe, two conclusions seem to emerge from the first accounts, with a clarity which is not likely to be shaken by subsequent developments. In the first place, the whole episode will administer a rude shock to any complacency which may still be lurking among us as to the enlightenment of our own civilization. It must, of course, be admitted that the transformation of a small university town into a center for national research cannot be carried out with some amount of friction and all that. But basically, then they talk about these reactionary people that aren't in the swing of things with the so it's creating a snob thing. He says, but we have to admit that these events may have been exploited by sectional interests or widespread prejudice. It is disquieting to be forced to suspect that blah, 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 a bunch of things. Okay. And he says, and it really reveals gaps and weaknesses in our national level of education because of the ill-informed opposition to Nice, basically. And the second moral to be drawn from last night's events is more cheering. It's that Nice is really a great organization. And it's good that they had police power because they could contain and help the locals control these Neanderthals that are resisting. It's the it's pretty interesting how they characterize the. So now it'll be very convenient to place the whole Edgestowe area under the exclusive control of the institutional police for some limited period. Anyhow, so that's the little bit of the propaganda. Now here's how they write it up for the commoners. All right. What is happening at Edgestowe? Big question. That is the question which John Citizen wants to have answered. The institute which has settled at Edgestowe is a national institute. That means it's yours and mine. We are not scientists and we do not pretend to know what they're doing, and on and on. Okay, but we expect from them a solution to unemployment problem, the cancer problem, the housing problem, the problems of currency, of war, of education. We expect a brighter and cleaner future, blah, blah, blah. And he says, and so who are these people riding against all this wonderfulness that our organization is going to produce, so to speak? And he says, I say these disturbances have been engineered. And so there are traitors in our midst, you know, and I'm not afraid to say who they may be. They may be so-called religious people. They may be financial interests. They may be the old cob-spinning professors and philosopher of Edgestowe University itself. They may be Jews. They may be lawyers. I don't care. Blah, blah. Anyhow, it goes on. And so these are engineered riots, and it's a good thing NICE was there with their police to take care of it. So, anyhow, pretty darn interesting read to see how that was all engineered and planned. Okay. Now, turns out NICE is run by a deputy director. The director is nothing but a figurehead. He doesn't have any idea what's going on at all. And the deputy director conveys occasional commands from what's called the head or a committee, right? But mostly it's done through politically correct language, and he pushes towards a consensus. It's very interesting. The guy can't say a straight sentence at all, but everybody wants to be part of the inner circle, and the net result is there's only 3 or 4 people in the whole organization know what's going on. All the rest pretend they know or act like they know, because then they feel like they're insiders or not. It's total phony environment. Very, very interesting. By the way, there is no committee at all. It's all kind of made up. A very interesting psychology at play. All right. So NICE is seemingly run by a head, but it's a literal head, severed from the body of a convicted killer. That's one of the nightmares that Jane had. She saw them take the head and disappear with it. And so the thing is sustained with tubes and wires and a computer, and they're calling that part of the next evolution of humanity. All right, possible evolution. All right, so there's a short passage in page 239 that give you an idea of some of the of how it works, how the people within NICE don't know what's going on, but think they are, and are brainwashed to love the whole thing. It's very interesting. So one of the insiders, one of the guys that really knows, there's only a couple that really know anything. His name is Frost. He said, I had my conversation with Philostrato. He's one of the scientists that work on the head. Okay. I used expressions which must have made my meaning clear if he had any notion of the truth. His senior assistant, Wilkins, was present too. The fact that neither of them is really interested. The fact is, neither of them is really interested. What interests them is the fact that they have succeeded in keeping the head alive and getting it to talk. What it says does not really interest them. As to any question about what is really speaking, they have no curiosity. I went very far. I raised question about the head's mode of consciousness, its sources of information. There was no response. Okay. These people were totally brainwashed to do their job, and they had and nothing outside their little picture of things mattered to them. They had no interest. They were completely automatons, so to speak, doing their work. And so, now this is Wither, the deputy director. He says, "Are you suggesting a movement towards this, Mr. Studick, along those lines? In other words, are we going to try to brainwash him into those lines?" And he says he expresses some reservations about doing that. And he said, and so at this point, said Frost, one must guard against the error of supposing that the political and economic dominance of England by Nice is more than a subordinate objective. It is individuals that we are really concerned with. A hard, unchangeable core of individuals really devoted to the same cause as ourselves. That is what we need, and that is what we are under orders to supply. So there is some guiding spirit here, but you never really find out where it's coming from. At least I didn't figure it out. But later you'll find out that description, a hard, unchangeable core of individuals, really devoted to the same cause as ourselves. That is what we're under orders to supply. I believe that's what C.S. Lewis means by that hideous strength. Having individuals' will completely absorbed into some ideology. Like those two scientists, they were completely absorbed into the mission of Nice. And whatever they had to do, they did. And the rest they didn't question or anything. And their will, they were completely controlled. And that there's an argument about what the that hideous strength really was, and that's what I think it is, and I'll explain a few things about that. And so Wither ends up saying, he says, well, yes, of course, nothing is so much to be desired as the greatest possible unity. I would welcome an interpenetration of personalities so close, so irrevocable, that it almost transcends individuality, to absorb, to assimilate this young man. That is exactly the description in the Screwtape Letters of hell and what the tempters do to the patients, and what eventually Uncle Screwtape does to the nephew that failed. They absorb their will. So this is a major theme within C.S. Lewis writing, and I believe there are people today walking around the street. Here are two examples in my family and my wife's family. On many subjects, these relatives are ordinary. You can talk with them. Everything's fine. They seem rational. Everything's normal. You bring up certain political ideas, and they start frothing at the mouth pretty much, and they become mean, nasty people. That portion of their mind has been absorbed into the ideology. They won't listen to anything other than the ideology. They 100% support the ideology. Their will, they can't control themselves. They can't control their rage. I think that's why some of the writers of things are the same thing. They can't control it because their will has been absorbed. This is real stuff. This happens. There are some of the quotes I think I used already. So it's really scary true. Okay, so I talked kind of about Mark and I actually, he was drawn in, and they started to brainwash him in various ways, very interesting psychological things they did to him, and he caught on. He caught on, and then he had to pretend he was going along with it till he could figure out a way to get away without getting killed. So that's where we leave Mark before the big battle. Okay, that happens. So he gets kind of out of the action because he's trying to figure out a way to not be brainwashed. Okay, meanwhile, Jane has these powers, and she ends up, through a series of accidents, getting drawn into the St. Anne's world, which is a world of love, beauty, purpose, hierarchical harmony. There's about a dozen or so individuals, and they each have different roles. There's even a bear that's part of the group. It turns out Ransom can interact with creatures the way the Queen of Paralandra could interact with them and get them to do things. And anyhow, he has that skill now. And so one of them is a bear. All right. So it's run very organic. He's really more or less just a spiritual influence. But she basically, when she walks in there, she's suffering from autonomous will syndrome, I call it. In other words, she wants to be in charge of her life, and she doesn't want any kind of a feminist sort of attitude towards things. And eventually she's told, really, to be happy and to fulfill your destiny, you have to, in a sense, lose yourself to find yourself. You must surrender to things like God's will and your female nature. There's a lot of feminism kind of themes in here. And to Ransom, there's this battle, very important battle for the whole earth. Come on, you got to be part of the team, and then eventually when you go back with your husband. And it's not at all anti-feminine. It definitely, C.S. Lewis gets accused of that every once in a while, and this book is one of them. And it is absolutely not. In fact, I think it's just the opposite. But he does emphasize the complementary nature of male and female, and it's several places in the book. Let's see, anything else? That lose yourself and find yourself. That's from Matthew chapter 10, verse 39. By the way. Okay, so this whole thing is hideous. Especially that the picture of that head and how it operates and things is kind of hideous. But there's no clear definition of what the hideous strength really is. It's one of those gems that the C.S. Lewis put in there so that we would have the pleasure of seeking it, and many people have. And so I did some research on that. And one scholar says that, first off, the terminology came from a poem from 1554, all right? And it says, the shadow of the hideous strength was 6 miles or more long. Anyhow, it was referring to the Tower of Babel. And so that scholar and many people, and I believe it relates to the Tower of Babel story. All right, so, and here's a picture. I have a picture of the tower, a representation of the Tower of Babel. But the whole thing about the Tower of the Babel, if you remember that, all these people got together and they were united, and the only way to ununite them was God mixed up their language. And that's how he ununited them. And that's exactly how Merlin defeats Nice, is by confusing their language. You'll have you get this, you'll have there's a blog where the person examined 3 different theories of it. I think I'll just go over them real quickly. This gal had ideas of 3 different theories. Wait a second. One, that it's the power of evil men, the energetic ruthlessness that happens in evil men. The other thing has to do with tactics of Satan. And the last thing is deceptive, distorted communications. And I think that's the real one. But she explains in her blog different reasons for the stuff. And she gives examples of some of the distorted communications where they're in high focus of many places where Mark and Jane used to be able to talk really well, and after they get married, all of a sudden they didn't talk very well. So they end up blaming each other for things and this and that. And the nice is definitely controlled through language and distortions of language and misuse of language and so on. So there's a lot of that in here. So what happens is the nice ends up believing Merlin got out of they find where he was kept, where he lay in state, so to speak, and he's gone. So they're trying to find him. All right, and basically so are the Society of St. Anne trying to find him. So there's this adventure trying to find him. And what happens is Merlin takes a homeless person's clothes because he didn't have much clothes on and it was rainy day or something, a rainy night. And he takes the homeless guy's clothes. So Nice finds a homeless guy that has no clothes and they say, this is Merlin. And so they try to talk to him. The guy doesn't answer. For some reason, he doesn't want to, he keeps a low profile. He doesn't want to answer anybody. So this is Merlin. So they take him back into the Nice headquarters to treat him and they're giving him food and they're treating him like a king, but he won't answer any questions. And they're wondering, we don't know the right language. And they want a language expert of different kinds because they're not sure what language Merlin would speak. And so they're running around trying to do this. So, and that's the inn. That's the way the real Merlin can go in there as a language translator. And so a couple of people from the St. Anne's group gets to infiltrate Nice because they want a translator. And then there's a banquet, and Merlin confounds the language of all those present. And then he sneaks out of the room and he goes to the dungeon where they're torturing people and animals. And he and the bear release all the animals. And those animals are very upset at having been tortured by those people from Nice, and they invade the dining room, and it's a bloody battle, so to speak. Anyhow, the whole thing is very, very exciting. So there's one quick quote to show that Wither, the deputy director, is totally a postmodern man on his way to hell, and he doesn't care. And here's the description. Okay, he figured out what was going on and how it happened and all this stuff. And he says, it is incredible how little this knowledge moved him. It could not, because he had long ceased to believe in knowledge itself. Basically, year after year, he acquired a fixed refusal of everything that was any degree other than himself. He became completely self-centered. All right. He had willed with his whole heart that there should be no reality and no truth. So he's not only a postmodern guy, there's no reality except what's in his mind. He's a post-truth guy, which is the most recent manifestation of postmodernism. All right. And so he describes the scene and says, with eyes wide open, seeing that the endless terror is just about to begin, and yet, for the moment, unable to feel terrified. He watches passively, not moving a finger for his own rescue, while the last links with joy and reason are severed, and drowsily sees the trap close upon his soul. So basically, he's going to hell and not raising a finger about it. And he knows it, and he doesn't, and it's not part of his reality. He's just so wrapped up in himself. It is really a scary description of what postmodernism can do to a human being. Really, really interesting stuff. Okay, so big battle, and all kinds of things happen, and good temporarily triumphs at least. And as you remember, the whole story starts with this young, somewhat unhappy married couple. And they are moving in different circles through most of the book. He went to Nice and headquarters, and she's with St. Anne's, and they're both learning things about themselves. Okay, and he spirals down spiritually for a while, but then kind of catches on that, wait, this is wrong, and tries to get back. So about near when this battle about to start, he is trying to get out of there. All right, and so the basically the let's see, how can I say this? First off, I believe marriage is a type for the Trinity. That is the nature of marriage is a physical manifestation to help us understand the kind of love, the creative love within the Godhead. All right, but also marriage shows us a physical type of how we are to approach God in prayer. Let's say you approach God, say, I know I'm not worthy, but I want you anyhow. And so in marriage, in a way, that's a healthy way for the spouses to approach each other, both the man and the woman, saying something to that effect and surrendering to each other, so to speak. And that's what's happening at the end of this book. They are approaching each other kind of with that attitude. To me, it was beautiful. Anyhow, they were separated for a long time, and there's all kinds of transportation issues in that area, but they agreed to meet at a hotel. They could reach each other, and okay, we'll meet at a hotel. We can't get home. The roads are blocked and everything. We'll meet at a hotel. And so they're about to, so the book ends as they're about to meet, but they have not met. They don't meet in the book. Okay. But the picture I have of the final approaching each other, I think is beautiful, and the way husbands and wives should approach each other. And the very final words, I think, prove something about Lewis. All right. And she approaches the hotel, and she sees into the room, clothes were piled on a chair inside the room. How exactly like Mark? Obviously, it was high time she went in. She was accepting, so to speak, her motherly role to look after this guy who has a tendency to be a little sloppy and this and that. And she was perfectly happy to approach, adopt that motherly role. But it told me that as between male and female, C.S. Lewis holds the female a little higher esteem at the very end of this. Anyhow, the scene is beautiful, and it's so romantic without being romantic. It's 10 after 7, and I can talk about my example of a non-governmental effort or not. It'll take about 10 or 15 more minutes. You want to just, but it's not part of the book, but it's something I think is kind of related to a theme in the book. Have any druthers? Jeff, you're the boss. You have any druthers?
Go for it.
All right. So I ran into something that is very much this non-governmental agency kind of thing, doing big things in the society, no accountability whatsoever. All right. It has to do with Common Core State Standards Initiative, which started around 2010. Bill Gates puts 100,000 or 100 million, maybe, I don't know, a ton of money in it. It's an effort to basically remake K-12 education and unify it throughout the whole America in English and math. Okay, so first off, understand how school districts and the hierarchy that is governmental. The school district, like Poway Unified School District, it's 50% administrators. Most school districts in America have passed the 50% administration early part of this century. So there's a lot of administration going on at the school district level. The County of San Diego has a big Board of Education department. I was there, big building, a lot of more layers of administration. Right. The state of California has a Department of Education, and they have a lot of administration, lots of things, and they are serviced by think tanks that get grants to create educational policy and do things. All right. And the federal Department of Education, same thing. A lot of administrators, and they have tons of money. I looked up the think tanks that service the federal level Department of Education. There's more than 100 of them. And they're high-powered people. And I looked up some of the resumes of some of the people writing papers about Common Core, and all these people are unaccountable. You can't write a letter to, you don't know where some of the policies come from and things. So it's but the Common Core was implemented and decided by National Governor Association. That's a bunch of governors got together, not doing their governor job. They kind of voluntarily got together. It's not a governmental organization. It's just an association of a bunch of governors. And there's a council of chief state school officers. That is, the head of the Department of Education of each state belongs to this thing. Again, they're not, the California members, they're not servicing California people when they go there. That's a completely quasi-governmental organization. And they kind of coordinated some of the work in this Common Core. So the whole idea of Common Core is they'll have new assessments, new measurements, bunch of things. And so the Department of Education gave tons of money out to two different, again, non-governmental organizations who create the testing standards. And there were two versions of it. All right. And the it took more than a year of research, and there was a handful of us doing it in the Poway area, and then there were other people around the country doing it to figure out where some of the ideas, like some of the math ideas, where do they really come from, and who decided various things. Very, very hard to find out where things are. In other words, if a parent had a complaint about any aspect of their child's education, they wouldn't know. And if they took a year, they wouldn't be able to find out who to complain to. Because everybody can point to somebody else. Oh, this came from here and this came from there. None of them are governmental organizations. There's no way to unelect those people. What it amounts to is the strategy is to make the school board, the local school board, all they do is make it palatable to raise bonds to support the school district. They are advertising arm for the school administration. They have no power. They can't do anything. Now, when we started inquiring of the administration and Poway we visited them many times, talked with them, this and that, it was like talking to a recording machine. They knew all the correct language. It was all politically correct. Common Core is wonderful. It'll develop critical thinking. It'll do this and that and the other thing. There was not an original idea in any head, any person we talk with. It is incredible. And the system they have is total control of the teachers. They have teacher guides. And the plan was to eventually have video cameras in every classroom so that the local principal could watch any classroom they wanted to make sure the teacher is following Common Core standards and does not deviate from Common Core standards. They had a plan for the local principal of a school report to state level administrators, bypass the school district, go straight to the state level, and eventually these quasi-governmental consortia. Nobody elected there. No way to unelect, get them out of office. All right. It was amazing, amazing, amazing stuff, and that's still going on. The Common Core is still kind of plowing ahead. It was a total fiasco in terms of the grades went downhill and a lot of stress and this and that. But basically, it was to homogenize, and they mean homogenize. I saw one, I got some of the teaching materials that were created for the teachers, great big long, all day seminar, and I went on and on. And then towards the end, it said, there'll be no deviations from the material whatsoever. They said, here's our plan, here's all this. And so you might as well hire a robot. You don't need a person trained in teaching and that has psychology and this and that, because they want robots. So anyhow, very, very scary. But that's an example of non-governmental organizations with incredible power over a very important segment of our society, education.